guess we've all seen those TV programs, haven't we, that feature someone's story about rebuilding or building a new home, rebuilding a home, renovating, radically remodeling their garden. You've seen them, right? You know, building dream homes was one, I think was run on BBC Two. DIY SOS was one that I always used to cry to, so I don't watch that anymore. Grand Designs. Garden Rescue is another. And there's a few of Angela's favourites among these. She loves them. I find them quite dangerous programmes to have on our TV. Because they plant ideas in Angela's mind. And just when I think my work here is done, you know where it's going, right? Nick Knowles and what's his name, Alan Titchmarsh. I've got a lot to answer for, I tell you. But in all seriousness, these TV programs, they're really interesting to watch. You get to see the whole process, don't you? From that initial concept, idea, what the people want to actually achieve, all the planning, all the sketches and ideas, the budget. And you see it right the way through that building process, right the way up to the end product, so to speak. But this is the thing. Would we be so gripped by watching these programs if we'd had the concept element and the ideas, you know, followed by all the planning and the design and so forth, and then the program ended there without actually doing anything? Would we be still so interested in watching it? Probably not, I don't think so, because without the actual doing of the work, the first two elements of the program would be, well, pretty pointless, I think, in my mind. There's a couple of quotes that I've stumbled on this week. The first one is attributed to Nelson Mandela. He talking about this in Vision. He said, "Vision without action is merely a dream. Action without vision just passes the time. But vision with action can change the world." I think that's a fantastic quote. There was a social entrepreneur, a guy, a bestseller, international bestseller, a guy called Brian McGill. He said something very, very similar. He said, "Ambition without action is fantasy." He said, "Set a goal, write it down, and get started." That was Brian McGill. Again, fantastic quote. And that makes sense. You know, when they're making these TV house building, restoring programs, it's what makes them so compelling to watch. We see the person or the couple, see their ambition, their goal. We see them get the planning down, and we see them actually get on and do the work. Well, as we consider how this past year has impacted our lives as individuals, as families, corporately, as the church, we recognise there is so much we are recovering from. There's so much to rebuild in our lives. You know, just looking at the impact that it's had on, well, our work life, which in turn affects our finances. It's impacted education, our families, relationships, our ability to socialise and be church together. And of course, it's also impacted us emotionally and psychologically, our physical well-being. There is just so much to rebuild. Now, thankfully, with the rollout of the vaccine, we're starting to see, as I said before, a bit of light at the end of the tunnel. There's some encouraging signs of normality ahead of us. It's very much time then for us to think about how we rebuild. How do we build back better? I mean, that sounds a bit of like a political slogan or something, doesn't it? But I'm sure it is. I think it is. I didn't make it up, but I couldn't have done. Build back better. Build back more beautiful. There you go. That's my one. And so we are continuing on this little series that we've started, Project Rebuild. We've been following along Nehemiah's story, haven't we, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, as he was called by God, envisioned by God to rebuild the city of Jerusalem. And this was after the people of Israel, they'd been exiled into Babylon for some 50 to 70 years. And in kind of blocks, they're kind of returning back to Palestine, back to Jerusalem. Now, if you've been around for the last couple of weeks, we've read how Nehemiah, his building process, his program, it kind of started with prayer, didn't it? It was him getting before God on his knees for like 4 to 5 months. He must have had sore knees, but that was his priority. It was prayer, get before God in order to understand what is it, God, you want to do here in this situation. What is it you want to do in Nehemiah's life? What is it you want to do in the life of the people? So he got vision from God. In chapter 2, we read how Nehemiah, he left Babylon and journeyed back to Palestine in order to kind of assess the extent of the damage. It's kind of like, what are we up against here? So he started to bring together a plan. Now this week we're going to see how Nehemiah is turning vision and planning into action. He's literally getting the work done. Now we're not going to have time to actually go through the whole of the passage here, so we're going to dip in and out, get a good feel for how these people are actually working together to complete this vital work. So without further ado, let's get into Nehemiah chapter 3, starting at verse 1. If you have a Bible and you want to get along and come along and follow with that. So please pray for me with all these names. No, we pray, God, that you would speak to our hearts this morning, empower your words into our hearts, motivate us, stir us in your spirit in Jesus' name. Amen. So verse 1 begins, get my breath. It's even the first word, Eliashib. Eliashib, or Eliashib. Eliashib, the high priest, and his fellow priests went to work and rebuilt the sheep gate. They dedicated it and set its doors in place, building as far as the Tower of the 100, which they dedicated, and as far as the Tower of Hananel. The men of Jericho built the adjoining section, and Zakur, son of Imri, built next to them. Now we go on to the fish gate. The fish gate was rebuilt by the sons of Hassenaah, of all people. They laid its beams, they put its doors and bolts and bars in place. Somebody called Meremoth, son of Uriah, the son of Hakaz, repaired the next section. Next to him, Meshullam, son of Berechiah, the son of Meshezabel, made repairs. And next to him, Zadok, son of Banar, also made repair. I'm sure that Banar should have another N in it. You know?
Christine got it.
No, it would have been Banar, but it would have been a son of a banana. Move on, Rob. Get your mind on track. So, yeah. The next, verse 5, the next section was repaired by the men of Tekoa, but their nobles would not put their shoulders to the work under their supervisors. Let's skip down to verse 7. Next to them, repairs were made by the men of Gibeon and Mizpah, Melatiah of Gibeon, and Jadon of Meronoth. Places under the authority of the governor of Trans-Euphrates. Uzziel, son of Harhiah, one of the goldsmiths, repaired the next section, and Hananiah, one of the perfume makers, made repairs next to that. They restored Jerusalem as far as the broad wall. Move down to verse 14. We're just going to pull some of these things out. We get to my favourite part, the dung gate. The dung gate was repaired by Malchijah, son of Rechab, ruler of the district of Beth Hakerem. We're going to come back to that a little bit. He rebuilt it and put its doors with the bolts and bars in place. The fountain gate was repaired by Shallun, son of Kol-Hoseh, ruler of the district of Mizpah. He rebuilt it, roofing it over and putting its doors and bolts and bars in place. He also repaired the wall of the pool of Siloam by the king's garden as far as the steps going down to the city of David. Beyond him, Nehemiah, son of Azbuk, ruler of the half district of Beth Zur, made repairs up to the point opposite the tombs of David, and as far as the artificial pool and the house of the hero. So Nehemiah then, he's just working through, these are the people, these are the individuals that took responsibility for building different sections of the wall and the gates and stuff. And then we finish up then down at verse 31. It says, next to him, Melchizedek, one of the goldsmiths, made repairs as far as the house of the temple servants and the merchants, opposite the inspection gate, and as far as the room above the corner. And between the room above the corner and the sheep gate, the goldsmiths and merchants made repairs. They've done the full circle of this wall, some 2.5 miles of wall. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well in a bit. So a lot of work. So yeah, clapping, please. Yeah, I got so. You can see now why we didn't want to get land that on somebody else's shoulders to do. But anyway, so what we're going to do this morning, we're going to just pull out several key principles from this passage about what it actually means for us to actualize dream, or to turn vision into reality. That's the goal today. What do we do to turn vision into reality? And the first thing is to observe it takes effort and commitment, as does reading through Nehemiah 3. It takes effort and commitment. The task of rebuilding the wall, rebuilding the city walls, the gates, it wasn't a small challenge. It wasn't just like a nice little ornate picket fence around your front garden, little gate with a nice little latch or anything. That, as I say, these are fortified walls. They're intended for keeping the enemy out. They were 12 meters high, 2.5 meters thick. The job ahead of them was such an arduous and demanding task to undertake. It took effort, it took determination and commitment. And because of their effort and determination and their commitment, and by God's grace, you know what? They got the work done in less than 2 months. Yep, 52 days it took them to rebuild the wall, which is an amazing feat. But here's the thing. When we want to see our lives built up or see them rebuilt, or if, you know, when it comes to us, the church, later on, if we want to see the church community re-emerging from this pandemic and rebuilt to something far more beautiful than it was before, all of this is going to take effort and commitment on our part. It's not just about us doing lots of prayer. Yes, we do that. We get, pray lots, we get lots of vision, and then we kick back and say, okay, God, it's over to you. No, it's not about that at all. But even if you think about our relationships, or in relation to our marriage, we can't just say, I have a dream or an ambition for a strong, healthy marriage, which is nurtured in love and mutual respect and patience and honor for one another, unless we're actually going to get stuck in and do the work that is required to foster that kind of marriage, then you know what? It's not going to happen. Or if you have a heart to reach a certain group of people, maybe, homeless people or young families who are just starting out. And if you kind of think to yourself, I'd just love to pioneer a ministry here which serves these people, it shows them God's love and how he desires to completely transform their lives. Again, unless you're going to actually put your back into it and get your knees dirty, so to speak, it will never go any further than being just a vision, just a dream. A vision to rebuild, build or rebuild, it's going to take effort. That's the first thing. Secondly, it requires others. I mean, as I say, we didn't get a chance to read all of the chapter, but did you see how many people from within the community it involved? So to assume that it was just Nehemiah, he was the one that solely actuated the vision himself by building alone, is just so far from reality. Yes, I mean, he did spend months in solitude praying and seeking God, but it took people coming together and supporting one another to make it a reality. Vision building or dream building is a team effort. Again, Just thinking about those of us who have raised a family or are raising families. You know, when we do child dedications here in our church, we make a point of emphasizing just how tough a job it is for parents to raise kids. And it requires the love, the support of other people, you know, friends, family, people around them, the church family, to support them in their journey. In our services, we often quote that ancient tribal parable, it takes a village to raise a child. And boy, don't we know that that's true. You know, when Angela and I, when we had Naomi, we were still so immature. We were 19 years old. But, you know, I was there, I was at the birth. It was a beautiful event, amazing event. I was so emotional, so excited, proud, everything rolled in. I know I wasn't the one that was pushing this significant sort of object out of my orifice, but it was a moment for me as well, nonetheless. And before you know it, we had Naomi. And before you know it, these crazy people at the hospital, they trusted these two young, know nothing about parenting kids to take this human being, this baby, home on their own. And man, I just thought, in hindsight, how crazy were they? But we did. We spent some months living with my parents at home. But it wasn't long before we got into a place of our own. It was a real old, well, cold, damp and dirtied flat over in Weedon. But we made it home. We got in, we closed the doors behind us, and then Naomi started to cry. And she cried. And it was all the time, actually, but it was mostly at night, just when you're about to go to bed and you're really, really tired, and she'd start crying. And there's just nothing we could do. We were shattered. We couldn't do anything to shake her from this pattern that she'd formed of being awake at night and being asleep during the day. And there was all the colic issues and so on. It was so hard work. But then suddenly it's like reality kicks in, and this fantasy, this dream of this wonderful family life, you know, raising a beautiful little human being, turned into mission impossible. The truth is, we can't do it alone, can we? We need to call on the help and support and advice of the others around us, people that care for us. And that's true when it comes to us building or rebuilding our marriage, building a ministry and a team, planting a church, building a new business venture, building a vision of significance then, substance. It needs to be done with others. So we need to, I think if we try to do it alone, we don't do ourselves any favours. Vision building or dream building is a team event. Thirdly then, every contribution is valuable. Every contribution is valuable. As you read there through Nehemiah's list of contributors to the work, it's not like, you know, rolling credits to a Hollywood movie. You know how they do that sometimes. They start with the big name actors, the big stars. Sometimes the text is even bigger, you know, Sylvester Stallone and Bruce Willis, Helen Mirren, and all those sorts of people. And then as the list kind of eventually goes down and down and down, it's to the people like people that did the makeup, and it's in small letters, and you know, people that actually made the sandwiches, and it's just all these people that none of us have got any interest in. Now, for Nehemiah, it's not like that. For him, it was like there was this blockbuster event starring everyone. You know, everyone mattered. You see, Nehemiah, he understands that everybody's contribution is valuable. Actually, it's vital. When it comes to building the wall, they couldn't afford to have Milkajar or Meremoth or whatever their names were not showing up and doing their part. If they didn't show, then that section of the wall or the gate didn't get built or restored, and that means the people as a whole are vulnerable. They could get killed because of that. When it comes to building up of the church here, it's not about like the Super League players, the star players, and all the things that they do that stands out above others. And I just think, man, woe to us as a church if, the things that we do here, they start to resemble the values of things like X Factor, where the chief goal of every participant is to draw attention to themselves and to elevate themselves and push themselves in front of everybody else. Oh man, if we came out like that. It was the Apostle Paul, he wrote in Philippians chapter 2, he said, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. I just love the idea of us here in Vineyard Community Church, in sort of kind of working here in Daventry, in and around Daventry, sort of bringing God's vision into actual reality by an army of faceless nobodies, kind of working together, serving together to fulfill his purposes, all for his glory. That's what I would love to see, a bunch of faceless nobodies. But the flip side of that is true, though, that nobody is faceless to God. And this is the fourth point. God sees every contribution. There is no contribution that any of us could make that goes unnoticed by God. And that applies to the somewhat more visible contributions, and it actually applies to the contributions that kind of take place in the background that nobody else tends to see. I even think that God makes a special note for those he sees doing the less desirable jobs, the things that none of us want to do. In Nehemiah's wall building project, coming back to verse 14, we read about the dung gate, didn't we? I bet you can probably kind of guess what the dung gate was all about. Yep, it was related to crap. The dung gate is the gateway through which the people of the city transported all their crap, all the junk, all the waste. Think about all human waste and all the slurry and all that stuff dumped. It's got to be dumped and burned outside of the city. Can you even begin to imagine the smell around that whole place, the whole area? But somebody had to do the work. They couldn't just leave that entrance unprotected. They would be unsafe. And so this guy called Milkajari stepped up to the plate, bless him. So he took the job on that probably most people would have avoided at all costs. For those that have been around us for a while, for many years, you'll know that we have found, many of our members have found ourselves in unsavory places whilst we're trying to serve God through serving our community. We've been out there clearing gardens from rubbish, and that's been pretty atrocious at times. We've been out clearing people's homes and things. I remember the reaction that we had from some of the business owners in the town centre when a team of us took on the task of cleaning their staff toilets. It was largely about us kind of learning to live out the level of servitude that Jesus demonstrated when he got on his knees and washed his disciples' feet that day. It was pretty much the lowest and least desirable duties of his day. It was equivalent to cleaning toilets today, so that's what we did, why we did it. But that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to imitate him as we humbly served the businesses in our towns, and that's what we do. Now, what's interesting is that in Nehemiah's story, it says that Milkajah was the son of this ruler, and they were from this district called Beth Hakerem. Now, this is an interesting sideline, I guess. If you check out the literal translation of Beth Hakerem, I kid you not, it literally means the house of the vineyard. You can't make it up, can you? It's I don't know, maybe that's what the vineyard is meant to be, the church that does all the jobs that no other church wants to do or something. I guess so. But the real point is that God sees every moment of servitude He sees every moment of generous giving of ourselves. He sees it all, and he knows and he expects that each of us have a part to play in making a difference in this world. And so maybe, I don't know, maybe you're here today and you kind of thought to yourself in the past, the only thing that I've done is put the chairs out in the church. That's all I've done. Or the only thing I've done is welcome people, welcome guests to the door. Do you know what I would say, contrary to what you may think, those roles are critical to our church. Imagine a little bit later on in the year when we are meeting together again in the school and someone is visiting our church for the first time. And maybe, imagine that they come along. This is somebody trying out church for the first time. And they've kind of made their way gingerly towards the school and they come into the building where nobody said a single word to them. Nobody even smiled at them. And then what's more, when they get into the hall, all of the chairs were taken up. And so they had to stand at the back all the way through. Or the rows of the chairs, they were kind of just thrown together and they were so close that each, when he had to sit down, his knees were kind of pressed against or wedged into the chair in front of them. And trying to actually stand up was, in such an arrangement, it required him to be an expert at yoga or something. Can you imagine it? Do you think that somebody like that would go away from our church having had a particularly positive experience or a negative experience? If, on the other hand, when someone actually came and they were greeted by this big beaming smile, this big beaming welcome to them, and the shaking of their hands and telling them how great it is to see them, maybe even introducing them to somebody else who could show them around the venue and what's taking place where and so forth, inviting them to go and get a coffee and a donut and saying, I'll come and sit with you. And what if they happened to notice that the chairs, they were clearly very thoughtfully laid out, giving anyone easy access to come and sit down? It really, really matters. So turning vision into reality, it takes lots of effort. It requires us to rely on others. Every contribution matters. It's all valuable. God sees every contribution. And finally, it requires us to be flexible. We have to be flexible. And I can imagine Nehemiah, he kind of put out his call in the Jerusalem Gazette for any kind of professional stone workers and mason workers and masonry workers, builders, bring them all out. Who actually showed up to do the job? Well, verse 1, it was Father Ted and Dawn French, the vicar of Dibley. They came out first of all. Eliashib, the high priest, and his mates. Yeah, we'll do something. We'll build the sheep gate. We'll do that section of the wall all the way up to that tower there. I kind of picture Nehemiah thinking, with his head in his hands, kind of thinking, oh man, where are the builders? But the thing is, I think a bit about it from Eliashib and the priest's perspective. They could have said, you know what? We know that there's an urgent job to be done. We know that it's God's plan to rebuild the walls, but you know what? It's not our job. We serve in the temple. That's what we do. We deal with people's spirituality, not practical things like building walls. But they don't do that. They're there. They roll up their sleeves. They got they're out there to do the work, building the gate, building the walls. And then, of course, they had a little church dedication and prayed for the walls or whatever they did, little church meeting as well. But who else did they have? In verse 8, was a guy called Uzziel. This guy is a goldsmith. He's a jeweler, for crying out loud. He turns up with his magnifying glass and tweezers and his special buffing cloth, He's like taking real good care of every brick, making sure it's calibrated and carefully fitting up against every other brick and polishing up the bricks and everything, making them look nice. Nehemiah must have been thinking, man, this can't get any worse. And then who shows up but Hananiah, the perfume maker. He's there prancing around in his floral shirt, handing out his perfume samplers to everybody around. And these are the people who have come to build. And And then in verse 12, last of all, Shallum, son of Halohesh, ruler of the half district of Jerusalem, repaired the next section with the help of his daughters. This is a politician and his daughters, of all people, come out to build. Now, there is absolutely no indication whatsoever in the text that these people had any experience at all in building walls or gates, let alone fortified walls and gates. What you have is a bunch of people who have been just gripped by the urgency of need to get God's work done. They saw the vision, they adopted the vision, and they were here. We're flexible. Nobody's claiming to be above any task. Nothing, we're not too important, with the exception of those guys in verse 5, the nobles, they said, didn't they? They wouldn't put their shoulders to the work under their supervisors. And I think that's just so sad, isn't it? Thankfully, all the other men in Tekoa, they never saw the task of rebuilding to be below them. So it's just this willingness to serve. And you know what? That really stands out here, I think, to me in this text. You have this bunch of people who recognize that a willing heart, a serving heart, a servant heart, this is character then, and coupled with availability is of the utmost importance. I have got to say though, I have seen these qualities shine brightly from a few people among us. I won't embarrass any of them because I know none of them would want any attention drawn to them. But, I have seen this. There are folks that have come up to Ange and I effectively saying, Rob, Ange, it's not my skill set, but. Or, Rob, Ange, I don't really know whether it's really me. I don't know if it's my calling, but. Or, I'll probably not be any good at this, but. And it's followed by, but I'll serve in this or that project. I'll come and help with food bank wherever I can. I'll come and help with that laptops and for home learning project that we did. I'm going to make that happen. And I'd like to serve and help with managing the sun projection on Sunday. I'd like to help out serving some drinks and welcoming people and just help setting up and setting down on Sunday. I just want to have a go at helping lead kids work or whatever it is. I think the question for us all is, are you flexible? Are you ready to be flexible? Do you have a willing heart? When we launch out our Sunday meetings again later in the year at the school, do you have a heart that sees the urgency and need ahead of us and says, you know what, I'm going to step into that. I'm going to actually, count on me. I'll do it. I'll roll my sleeves up. I'll have a go. I think it's absolutely vital that we all need to find our place. We all need to get that sense of belonging, being part of something, being part of team. We all need to hear from God about what it is that He is calling us to do. We need to discover the unique giftings that He has designed us with. And you know what? Often it's in the actual doing of something where we actually discover those gifts. So the question is, are you ready? Are you flexible? And are you willing to rebuild? Shall we pray?